In the middle of a blizzard sweeping through Chicago, a little girl stood trembling in a dark alley, her face pressed against the freezing brick wall, bare feet on frozen concrete. No coat, a thin pink dress with a torn shoulder clinging to her frail legs. Her small hands clutched a plastic bag holding a few packets of instant noodles and a small loaf of bread. When the black SUV stopped and the man stepped out, gently asking why she was standing there, the little girl's answer cracked the ice-cold heart of Chicago's most powerful mafia boss for the first time in 18 years. She whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind, "I can't go inside until I bring food back. My aunt made me stand here," and what Salvatore Marchetti did next would change the little girl's fate forever. The snow fell harder now, thick flakes swirling between the buildings like white curtains drawn across the city. Salvatore Marchetti did not rush forward. He stood 3 steps away from the child, watching, calculating. It was the habit of a man who had survived 2 decades in the underworld, the instinct that had kept him alive when others fell. He observed before he acted, always. Under the dim glow of the flickering streetlight, the details of the little girl emerged like wounds revealed one by one. Her feet were not merely cold, they were purple, the color of bruises left too long untreated. Her toes curled inward against the frozen concrete, seeking warmth that did not exist. Her knees trembled, yet they remained locked straight, rigid, as though she had been commanded never to bend them. The posture was unnatural for a child. It was the posture of a prisoner. Salvatore had seen many things in his 37 years. He had witnessed betrayal and bloodshed. He had ordered men to their deaths without flinching. But this stillness, this terrifying obedience from a creature so small, it carved something open inside him that he had believed was long dead. This was not a lost child. A lost child would cry. A lost child would spin in circles, searching for a familiar face, calling out for help. This girl did none of those things. She stood facing the wall, as though the wall itself was her only safety, as though turning around would invite something far worse than the cold. He stepped closer. The snow crunched beneath his leather shoes, the sound sharp against the howling wind. The girl's small shoulders tensed. He watched the muscles beneath her thin dress pull tight, watched her spine straighten even more, watched her shrink into herself without moving an inch. She did not turn around. She did not look at him. She simply waited, the way prey waits when it knows the predator is near. "I will be quiet," she whispered suddenly, her voice so small it nearly vanished into the storm. "I promise I will be good." The words hit Salvatore like a blade between the ribs. That was not the voice of a 6-year-old child. That was the voice of someone who had learned to survive by becoming invisible, someone who had been taught that silence was safety, that smallness was protection, that existing too loudly would bring pain. He knew that voice. He had heard it before, 18 years ago, in a room he could not enter in time. The wind shifted violently, howling through the narrow alley with sudden fury. It caught the torn sleeve of the girl's dress and whipped it upward, exposing her thin arm to the pale light. Salvatore's breath stopped. There, on the inside of her forearm, was a scar, old, healed, but unmistakable in its shape. The triangular point, the flat base, the precise edges burned into flesh that had once been soft and unmarked, the shape of an iron. Someone had pressed a hot iron against this child's skin. Someone had held it there long enough to leave a mark that would never fade. Salvatore Marchetti had killed men for less. Salvatore moved without hesitation. He unbuttoned his cashmere coat, the fabric worth more than most people earned in a month, and draped it carefully over the girl's trembling shoulders. The coat swallowed her small frame entirely, falling past her knees like a blanket made of darkness. The child flinched, not from the cold, not from surprise. She flinched from the warmth itself, her body pulling inward as though kindness was a trap she had learned to fear. Her fingers released the plastic bag for just a moment, then gripped it tighter, as if letting go would mean punishment, as if accepting comfort would cost her something later. Salvatore crouched down slowly, bringing himself closer to her level without crowding her space. He had interrogated men twice his size, had broken hardened criminals with nothing but silence and patience. But this required something different. This required gentleness he had not used in 18 years. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low and steady. The girl did not look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the brick wall, on a single crack that ran through the mortar like a scar. "Nimera," she whispered. "Nimera," he repeated it softly, letting the name settle between them. "Who sent you outside tonight?" "Aunt Priscilla." "Does she live up there?" A small nod. "Is there anyone else?" The girl's shoulders tightened beneath the heavy coat. "Uncle Marcus." The way she said the name told Salvatore everything. Uncle was not a term of affection. It was a term of warning, a title given to someone who held power over her, power that left scars shaped like irons. "Do you go outside like this often?" he asked. "Every night," Nimera said, her voice flat, rehearsed. "I have to buy food. If I do not bring it back, I cannot come inside." Salvatore looked at the plastic bag clutched in her frozen fingers. Instant noodles, a small loaf of bread, cheap items, basic survival. "Have you eaten tonight?" The girl shook her head. "Yesterday?" Another shake. "When was the last time you ate, Nimera?" Silence stretched between them, filled only by the howling wind. The girl's lips parted, then closed. Her eyes flickered with something that looked almost like shame. In Nimera's mind, a memory surfaced unbidden, 2 days ago. The kitchen, after midnight, when Aunt Priscilla had passed out on the couch with a bottle in her hand. Nimera had crept to the trash can, her stomach aching, her hands shaking. She had found a piece of bread there, hard and stale, discarded from Uncle Marcus's sandwich. She had eaten it quickly, silently, her ears straining for any sound of footsteps. If they had caught her, the punishment would have been worse than hunger. Salvatore watched the child's face. He saw the memory pass through her eyes like a shadow. He did not need her to speak it aloud. He understood. This girl was starving. And in her hands, she held food she was forbidden to touch. A starving child carrying a meal that was never meant for her. The rage that rose in Salvatore's chest was not the hot, explosive kind. It was cold, quiet, the kind that made empires fall and men disappear without a trace. Then a sound shattered the moment. Above them, a metal door slammed open with a violent crash. The noise echoed through the alley like a gunshot. Heavy footsteps began descending the staircase, each step deliberate, each step closer. Nimera's entire body went rigid. Her breath stopped. Her eyes, for the first time, lifted from the wall and found Salvatore's face. In them, he saw pure terror. The footsteps grew louder. Each heavy thud against the metal staircase rang through the alley like a countdown. Closer, closer, closer. Nimera's entire body turned to stone. The trembling stopped. The breathing stopped. Everything about her froze in the way that small animals freeze when they sense a predator approaching. It was not the stillness of calm. It was the stillness of absolute terror. For the first time since Salvatore had found her, the girl turned around. Her eyes met his. They were brown, large, too large for her gaunt face, and in them, Salvatore saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Pure, undiluted fear. Not the fear of the cold that was stealing the feeling from her feet. Not the fear of a stranger standing in a dark alley. This was something deeper, something carved into her bones by repetition, by pain, by lessons taught through bruises and burns, and nights locked in darkness. This was the fear of what would happen if she was caught. Nimera's small hand shot out and grabbed the sleeve of his suit jacket. Her frozen fingers clutched the fabric with desperate strength, pulling him closer as though she could hide behind him, as though his body could become a wall between her and the approaching footsteps. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, sir, do not let Aunt see me talking to a stranger." The words tumbled out in a rush, frantic and fractured. "She will be angry. She will think I told. She will." The child could not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Salvatore understood what lived in that silence. The iron, the belt, the closet, the hunger, all the punishments a 6-year-old should never have learned to anticipate. He looked into her eyes, and the truth struck him with the force of a blow to the chest. This child feared help more than she feared the cold. In her world, kindness was not free. In her world, every act of compassion came with a price that would be extracted from her flesh later. Someone had taught her that being seen was dangerous. Someone had taught her that speaking was a crime. Someone had taught her that the safest thing she could ever do was disappear. The footsteps reached the bottom of the staircase. Salvatore made his decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He would not return her to her guardian. That path led back to the iron, back to the hunger, back to the wall she was trained to face. He would not call the police. He knew how the system worked. They would take her statement, check the address, and return her to the registered caretaker within hours. By morning, she would be punished for speaking. By next week, she might not be alive to speak again. There was only one path that could protect her: the hospital, medical evidence, a mandated report that would force the system to act before it could fail her. Salvatore reached down and lifted Nimera into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, lighter than a child her age should ever be. Her body stiffened at first, rigid with the expectation of pain. Then, slowly, she curled against his chest, her face pressing into his shoulder as though she was trying to disappear into him. He turned and walked quickly toward the black SUV, his footsteps crunching through the snow. Behind him, the building door burst open. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim yellow light of the hallway. A woman, thin, sharp angles, her head turned toward the alley, scanning the darkness with eyes that gleamed with something cold and predatory. She saw them. She saw the coat wrapped around the child. She saw the man carrying her toward the waiting vehicle. She saw her property being taken, and in the freezing Chicago night, Salvatore Marchetti felt those eyes lock onto his back like the barrel of a gun. The SUV pulled away from the curb, its tires cutting through the fresh snow with a soft crunch. Behind them, the figure in the doorway grew smaller, swallowed by the blizzard until she was nothing more than a shadow against the yellow light. Then the alley disappeared entirely, and there was only the road ahead, white and endless. Inside the vehicle, warmth poured from the heating vents like an embrace. The leather seats were soft, the air smelled clean, expensive, nothing like the mold and cigarette smoke that filled the apartment Namera had learned to call home. But the child did not relax. She sat in the passenger seat with her spine perfectly straight, her body pulled away from the backrest as though touching it would be a crime. Her hands remained folded in her lap, still clutching the plastic bag of groceries she had been sent to fetch. Her feet, purple and aching, hovered just above the floor mat, not quite touching, as if she did not believe she had the right to occupy space in this warm and quiet place. Salvatore noticed. He noticed everything. He did not tell her to lean back. He did not tell her to relax. He understood that comfort, for a child like this, felt like a trap. Every soft thing she had ever been given had been taken away. Every moment of peace had been followed by pain. Her body had learned that safety was a lie, and it would take more than heated seats and silence to teach her otherwise. So he drove. The city passed by outside the windows, muted and gray beneath the falling snow. Streetlights blurred into streaks of gold. Buildings rose and fell like shadows. The world outside was cold and indifferent. But inside the SUV, there was only the quiet hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of breath. Salvatore's hands rested on the steering wheel, steady and sure. But his mind was not in the present. It was 18 years in the past. Lucia. The name surfaced in his thoughts like a body rising from deep water. She had been 8 years old, bright, fearless, full of laughter that could fill an entire room. She had dark hair that curled at the ends and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Every morning, she would grab Salvatore's hand and pull him toward the door, insisting that he walk her to school even though their father's men could have driven her in armored cars. She wanted her brother, she wanted him, and every morning, he had gone. Until the morning he did not. The memory came unbidden, sharp as a knife. He had been 19, eager to prove himself to his father, desperate to show that he was ready to take his place in the family business. There had been a job that night, something important, something that required his attention. He had told Lucia he would see her in the morning. He had promised. The call came at dawn. Lucia was gone, taken from her bed while the guards changed shifts, a gap of 3 minutes that should have meant nothing, and instead meant everything. The rival family wanted leverage. They wanted the Marchetti empire to kneel. Salvatore's father paid the ransom. Every dollar, every demand. He followed every instruction to the letter, believing that money could buy back what had been stolen. It could not. 3 days later, they found her. An abandoned warehouse on the south side of the city. A concrete floor stained with things Salvatore refused to name. And Lucia, his Lucia, lying in the corner like a discarded doll. He had held her in the morgue. Her body was cold, stiff, wrong in every way a body could be wrong. Her eyes were closed, and he had been grateful for that small mercy, because he did not think he could survive seeing them empty. That was the day Salvatore Marchetti stopped feeling. He built walls around his heart, thick and high and impenetrable. He became the man his enemies feared and his allies obeyed. He became the silent king, cold and untouchable, because the alternative was to feel the grief that would have destroyed him. For 18 years, those walls had held. Now, sitting in his SUV with a stranger's child shivering beside him, he felt them crack. He glanced into the rearview mirror. Namera sat motionless, her thin frame drowning in his coat, her hollow eyes staring at nothing. 6 years old, fragile, starving, alone, almost the same age Lucia had been when she was taken from him. Salvatore's jaw tightened. His grip on the steering wheel hardened until his knuckles turned white. This time, he whispered to himself, the words barely audible above the heater's hum. This time, I will not be too late. Salvatore had not survived 2 decades in the underworld by being careless. He had survived by thinking 3 moves ahead, by anticipating the traps before they were set, by leaving no thread that could be pulled to unravel him. Tonight would be no different. He reached toward the dashboard and pressed a small button near the rearview mirror. A tiny red light blinked to life. The dash camera was recording. "My name is Salvatore Marchetti," he said, his voice clear and deliberate. "The time is 10:47 in the evening. I am currently driving eastbound on West Division Street in Chicago. Approximately 15 minutes ago, I discovered a child in the alley beside the Quick Mart convenience store on North Ashland Avenue." He glanced at Nymera. She was watching him now, her eyes wide and confused, not understanding why he was speaking to the empty air. "The child's name is Nymera. She appears to be approximately 6 years old. When I found her, she was standing barefoot in the snow, facing a brick wall. She was wearing only a thin dress with no coat or shoes. Her feet show signs of frostbite. Her body shows signs of malnutrition and physical abuse, including a burn scar on her left forearm consistent with the shape of a clothing iron." He paused, letting the words settle into the recording. "I am transporting her to Street Mercy Hospital for emergency medical evaluation. I am requesting a mandated report to Child Protective Services. This recording serves as documentation of the circumstances surrounding her rescue." He pressed the button again. The red light continued to blink, capturing everything. Salvatore understood the game he was playing. A man like him, a man whose name appeared in federal files and whispered rumors, a man who commanded an empire built on shadows, could not simply take a child from an alley without consequences. In the world of daylight, where laws were written by men who had never walked through blood, his actions could be twisted into any story his enemies chose to tell. Kidnapper, predator, monster, the accusations would come. They always did. And when they came, he would need more than his word. He would need evidence. He would need witnesses. He would need a trail so clean and bright that no amount of darkness could obscure it. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and dialed a number he knew by heart. The line connected on the second ring. "Vincent," Salvatore said. "I need you at Street Mercy. Now." Vincent Corsetti was many things. Lawyer, consigliere, the only man outside the Marchetti bloodline that Salvatore trusted without reservation. He had been with the family for 23 years, through wars and betrayals and losses that would have broken lesser men. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He did not hesitate when the situation demanded action. "What do you need?" Vincent's voice was calm, professional, awake despite the late hour. "Everything required for a child protection case. Documentation, legal standing, whatever it takes to keep a 6-year-old girl out of the hands of the people who have been torturing her." A brief pause. Then, simply, 15 minutes. The line went dead. Salvatore set the phone in the cup holder and returned his attention to the road. The hospital was close now. He could see its lights glowing through the snowfall, a beacon of fluorescent white against the gray. Then his phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. He glanced down at the screen. The words glowed in the darkness of the car. "Where are you taking her?" 4 words. No signature. No explanation needed. Priscilla knew. She had seen them leave. She had seen the SUV. And now she was reaching out through the storm, her message a warning wrapped in a question. Salvatore's expression did not change. His face remained carved from stone, unreadable, impenetrable. But beneath the surface, something cold and dangerous shifted. He looked at the message for one long moment. Then he looked back at the road. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, the bones visible beneath the skin like ridges of buried fury. The emergency room at Street Mercy Hospital hummed with the quiet chaos of a winter night. Nurses moved between curtained bays. Monitors beeped their steady rhythms. The air smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion, the particular scent of a place that had seen too much suffering to be surprised by anything anymore. Salvatore carried Nymera through the automatic doors, her small body still wrapped in his coat, her face pressed against his shoulder. She had not spoken since they left the alley. She had not moved. She simply existed in his arms like a wounded bird, too tired to struggle, too broken to fly. He approached the triage desk with the same authority he brought to every room he entered. "I need a pediatric physician," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. "And a social worker." Immediately, the nurse behind the desk looked up, ready to deliver the standard response about wait times and procedures. Then she saw the child. She saw the bare feet, purple and swollen. She saw the thin dress, torn and inadequate. She saw the hollow cheeks and the eyes that stared at nothing. Her expression changed. Within minutes, they were ushered into a private examination room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. A bed stood in the center, covered with paper that crinkled with every movement. Medical equipment lined the walls, silent witnesses to whatever would be revealed. Dr. Amara Okonkwo arrived shortly after. She was a woman in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that held both warmth and steel. She had worked in pediatric emergency medicine for over 20 years. She had seen accidents and illnesses and tragedies of every kind. But the moment she looked at Naimera, something in her gaze shifted. "Hello, sweetheart," she said softly, approaching the bed where Salvatore had gently placed the child. "My name is Dr. Okonkwo. I am going to take a look at you, okay? I will be very gentle. You tell me if anything hurts." Naimera did not respond. She lay on the bed like a doll placed there by someone else, her eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles, her body rigid with the expectation of pain. Dr. Okonkwo began her examination. She started with the feet. The skin was discolored, mottled with patches of white and purple. First-degree frostbite, painful, but recoverable with proper treatment. She documented the findings on her tablet, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Then she moved upward. She lifted the hem of the thin pink dress, and her hands stilled. The child's ribs were visible beneath her skin, each bone casting a shadow against the pale flesh. Moderate malnutrition, the kind that developed over months, perhaps years, of inadequate food. The kind that spoke of hunger as a constant companion rather than an occasional hardship. Dr. Okonkwo's jaw tightened, but she continued. She examined the arms next. The burn scar on the left forearm was old, healed into a permanent mark. The shape was unmistakable. Triangular point, flat base, the imprint of a hot iron pressed against a child's skin and held there long enough to sear through every layer. The doctor's pen trembled slightly as she wrote. Then she asked Naimera to turn over. The child obeyed without question, moving with the mechanical compliance of someone who had learned that resistance only made things worse. She lay face down on the paper-covered bed, her small hands gripping the edges, her breath shallow and quick. Dr. Okonkwo lifted the back of the dress. 5 lines crossed the child's back, welts and scars in varying stages of healing. Some were fresh, still raised and red. Others had faded to thin white streaks against her skin. The pattern was unmistakable. A belt, a strap, something wielded with force and repetition. Around her wrists, faint bruises formed rings of purple and yellow, the marks of restraint, of being grabbed, of being held down or tied up. Dr. Okonkwo stepped back from the bed. Her face was calm, professional, but her hands shook as she set down her tablet. She looked at Salvatore and gestured toward the door. He followed her into the hallway, leaving Naimera in the care of a gentle-voiced nurse who was offering the child a warm blanket. Dr. Okonkwo turned to face him. Her eyes were dark with something beyond professional concern. It was rage, controlled, contained, but burning nonetheless. "These injuries," she said, her voice low and tight. "This is not discipline. This is not an accident. This is systematic torture." The doors to the emergency room burst open with a force that made the nearest nurses look up in alarm. Priscilla Dunn stormed through the entrance like a hurricane wrapped in human skin. Her coat was half-buttoned, thrown on in apparent haste. Her hair, streaked with gray, fell in disarray around her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed, glistening with tears that caught the fluorescent light. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the picture of a woman driven to the edge of sanity by fear for her beloved child. "Naimera!" she cried, her voice cracking with practiced desperation. "Where is my niece? Where is she? Someone tell me where she is." She spun in a circle, her gaze sweeping across the waiting area, the triage desk, the hallways beyond. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her lower lip quivered with what appeared to be barely contained anguish. It was a perfect performance. The concerned aunt, the frantic guardian, the woman who had searched through a blizzard to find the child she loved, only to discover that a stranger had taken her to a hospital in the middle of the night. Every gesture, every word, every tear was calibrated to evoke sympathy, to establish her as the victim, to paint whoever had brought Naimera here as the villain. She rushed toward the nurse's station, her voice rising to a pitch designed to attract attention. "Please," she begged, gripping the edge of the counter. "My niece, a little girl, 6 years old, brown hair, pink dress. Someone took her. Someone brought her here. I need to see her. I need to know she is safe." The nurse behind the desk opened her mouth to respond, But before she could speak, Priscilla's eyes found Salvatore. He stood in the hallway outside Namera's examination room, his back against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. His suit was still immaculate despite the snow and the chaos of the night. His face was carved from stone, expressionless, unreadable, and his eyes, dark and cold as a winter grave, were fixed directly on her. Priscilla faltered. For one fraction of a second, her mask slipped. Something flickered behind her eyes. A flash of calculation, a moment of uncertainty. She did not know this man, but she recognized what he was. Power radiated from him like heat from a flame. Danger clung to him like shadow. This was not the kind of stranger she could manipulate with tears and trembling lips. But Priscilla Dunn had spent a lifetime bending people to her will. She had lied her way through child services visits, had charmed the neighbors into looking the other way, had convinced everyone who mattered that she was a devoted guardian doing her best with a difficult child. She would not be intimidated by one man in an expensive suit. She drew herself up and marched toward him, her finger rising to point at his chest. "You," she spat, her voice shifting from desperation to accusation. "Who are you? Why did you take my niece? This is kidnapping. This is a crime. I will have you arrested." "I will." Salvatore did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood there, a wall of silence and steel, blocking the doorway to the room where Namera lay. His expression did not change. His posture did not shift. He looked at Priscilla the way a man looks at an insect crawling across his floor, with detached consideration of whether it was worth the effort to crush. Priscilla's voice grew louder, shriller. Desperate to fill the silence he refused to break. "I am her legal guardian. You have no right to keep her from me. I demand to see her. I demand." Inside the examination room, beyond the glass window that separated the hallway from the bed, Namera heard the voice. Her entire body contracted. She curled into herself on the hospital bed, pulling her knees to her chest, wrapping her thin arms around her legs. The warm blanket the nurse had given her fell away, forgotten. Her eyes went wide and glassy, fixed on the window, on the shape she could see beyond it. The voice grew louder, closer. Namera's lips began to move, forming words so quiet that even the nurse beside her had to lean in to hear them. "Please," the child whispered, her voice fracturing into pieces. "Please do not let her in. Please do not let her take me. Please, please, please." Priscilla's accusations filled the hallway like poison gas, spreading and swirling, designed to suffocate anyone who stood in her way. Her voice grew louder with each passing second, her finger jabbing toward Salvatore's chest, her performance escalating to draw every eye in the emergency room. Salvatore did not respond. He did not defend himself. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice or step toward her, or give her any reaction she could use as fuel. He simply stood in front of Namera's door like a statue carved from granite, immovable and silent. But he was not passive. His eyes moved across the hallway, cataloging every person present. The nurse at the station, who was watching with wide eyes, the orderly who had stopped mopping to stare, the security guard near the entrance who was reaching for his radio, Dr. Okonkwo, who stood a few feet away with her tablet clutched to her chest. Salvatore spoke, his voice low but carrying clearly through the corridor. "Doctor, nurses, security." He did not look at Priscilla. He looked at each person in turn, acknowledging their presence, making them part of what was happening. "I would like everyone to remain. I would like witnesses to this conversation." Priscilla faltered for just a moment, confusion flickering across her face. Witnesses were not part of her script. Witnesses complicated things. Witnesses remembered. Before she could adjust her strategy, the emergency room doors opened again. Vincent Corsetti walked in as though he owned the building. He was dressed in a three-piece suit, the color of charcoal, perfectly tailored, without a single wrinkle despite the late hour. His silver hair was combed back from his face. His leather briefcase hung at his side, heavy with documents. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent 3 decades in courtrooms and boardrooms, a man who had faced down prosecutors and politicians and criminals of every stripe, and had never once blinked. He approached the scene in the hallway with measured steps, his sharp eyes taking in everything: Priscilla's tear-streaked face, Salvatore's silent vigil, the medical staff watching from their positions. He stopped beside Salvatore and turned to face Priscilla. "Good evening," he said, his voice polite, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. "My name is Vincent Corsetti. I am legal counsel for Mr. Marchetti, and you must be the child's guardian." Priscilla straightened, sensing a new target for her performance. Yes, I am." And this man Vincent raised one hand, cutting her off with a gesture so subtle it barely seemed like an interruption. "Perhaps," he said, "you could clarify something for me. The child currently in that examination room is 6 years old. She was discovered approximately 1 hour ago standing barefoot in a snowstorm. She was wearing a thin dress with a torn shoulder. No coat, no shoes, no gloves. The temperature outside is currently 14 degrees Fahrenheit." He paused, letting each fact settle into the air like a stone dropping into still water. "She was found at approximately 10:30 in the evening, in an alley, alone. She stated that she had been sent to purchase groceries and was not permitted to return inside until she completed this task." Vincent tilted his head slightly, his gaze fixed on Priscilla with the intensity of a predator studying prey. "Can you explain how a child under your guardianship came to be in this situation?" Priscilla's tears dried with remarkable speed. Her expression shifted, hardened, became something sharper and more calculating. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she was not facing ordinary people. She was facing something else entirely. But she had survived difficult situations before. She would survive this one. "Nymera is a troubled child," she said, her voice taking on a tone of weary resignation. "She has mental problems, severe ones. She runs away constantly. She lies about everything. She hurts herself for attention and then blames others." She pressed a hand to her chest, the picture of a long-suffering caretaker. "I have tried everything. Therapy, medication, discipline. Nothing works. She must have snuck out tonight while I was sleeping. I have been searching for her for hours." Vincent's expression did not change. "And the injuries documented during her medical examination? The burn scar in the shape of an iron? The belt marks across her back? The signs of chronic malnutrition?" For just a moment, something ugly flashed in Priscilla's eyes. Then it was gone, buried beneath another layer of practiced victimhood. "She does those things to herself," Priscilla insisted. "I told you. She hurts herself. She lies. The door to the examination room opened. "Doctor." Okonkwo stepped into the hallway, a medical file in her hands and steel in her eyes. She had heard enough. "The injuries on this child's body," she said, her voice cutting through Priscilla's excuses like a scalpel, "are not self-inflicted. The burn scar on her arm is consistent with a heated object being pressed against the skin and held there. The marks on her back are consistent with repeated strikes from a belt or strap. The bruising around her wrists is consistent with physical restraint." She held up the file, her hand steady even as her eyes burned with controlled fury. "These wounds cannot be explained by a child hurting herself. And as a mandated reporter, I have already contacted Child Protective Services. They are on their way." Rachel Smith arrived at Street Mercy Hospital 43 minutes after the call was placed. She was a woman in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that had seen too many broken children to be surprised by anything. She wore no makeup. Her coat was plain. Everything about her was designed for function, not impression. She had worked for Child Protective Services for 9 years. She had investigated hundreds of cases, had removed children from homes where nightmares were the norm, had testified in courtrooms where monsters wore the faces of parents and guardians. She knew how to read the silences between words. She knew how to find truth buried beneath layers of fear. Priscilla was escorted to a waiting area, her protests loud but ineffective against hospital policy and CPS protocol. Salvatore remained in the hallway, close enough to be called if needed, far enough to give the child space. The examination room was converted into an interview space, soft and neutral, with a child-sized chair and a box of crayons left untouched on the table. Nymera sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. The warm blanket from earlier was wrapped around her shoulders. She looked impossibly small against the institutional furniture, a sparrow trapped in a cage of fluorescent light. Rachel sat across from her, not too close, not too far. She did not carry a clipboard. She did not hold a pen. She simply sat with her hands visible on her knees, her posture open and unthreatening. "Hello, Nymera," she said softly. "My name is Rachel. I am here to talk to you. Just talk. Nothing else." Nymera did not look up. "Can you tell me about your home?" Rachel asked. The response came automatically, like a recording played too many times. "Aunt Priscilla takes care of me. She loves me. I am bad sometimes, so she has to teach me. It is my fault when I get in trouble." The words were flat, rehearsed, stripped of any genuine emotion. They were the words of a child who had been coached, who had been warned what to say if anyone ever asked questions. They were armor built from lies she had been forced to believe. Rachel nodded slowly, accepting the answer without challenge. She had expected this. Children who had been abused often defended their abusers, not because they loved them, but because they feared what would happen if they did not. She changed tactics. "Nymera," she said gently. "I saw the mark on your arm. The one the doctor found. Can you tell me what shape it is?" Silence stretched between them. Namera's fingers curled into the blanket, gripping the fabric tight. Her eyes remained fixed on the floor, but something shifted in her posture, a crack in the wall she had built around herself. "Nimera?" Rachel prompted softly. "What shape is the mark?" The child's lips parted. For a long moment, no sound came out. Then, in a voice so small it was almost inaudible, she whispered, "It is shaped like an iron." Rachel did not react. She did not gasp or flinch or show any sign of the fury building behind her calm exterior. She simply nodded, her voice steady. "How did it get there?" Another long silence. Namera's breathing grew shallow. Her small body trembled beneath the blanket. Aunt Priscilla said, "I spilled her coffee." The words came slowly, painfully, pulled from somewhere deep and wounded. "But I did not spill it. I was just standing too close. She said I needed to learn to stay out of her way." The crack widened. Rachel waited. "Uncle Marcus uses his belt," Nimera continued, her voice growing quieter with each confession. "When I look at him wrong, he says my eyes are disrespectful. He says I need to learn to keep my head down." Her fingers twisted the blanket into knots. "Sometimes they lock me in the closet. When I cry too loud. When I ask for food before I finish cleaning. The closet is dark. There are spiders. I have to be quiet or they leave me there all night." Tears slipped down her hollow cheeks, but she made no sound. She had learned long ago that crying only made things worse. "I am not allowed to eat until the floors are clean," she whispered. "Sometimes I cannot finish. Sometimes I am too tired. Sometimes I fall asleep and then I do not get breakfast either." Rachel's heart shattered in her chest, but her face remained calm. This child needed stability, not another adult falling apart in front of her. Nimera finally looked up. Her brown eyes, red-rimmed and glistening, met Rachel's gaze for the first time. "If I tell the truth," she asked, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm, "will Aunt Priscilla hit me again?" Rachel Smith stepped out of the interview room with the weight of Nimera's confession pressing against her chest. She found Dr. Okonkwo waiting in the hallway, medical file in hand. Vincent Corsetti stood nearby with his briefcase open. Salvatore remained where he had been all night, a silent sentinel outside the door. At the end of the corridor, Priscilla paced like a caged animal, held back by security. "The child's statement corroborates the physical evidence," Rachel said quietly to Dr. Okonkwo. "Burns, belt marks, confinement, starvation. This is systematic abuse." She walked toward Priscilla with measured steps. "Miss Dunn, based on the medical evidence and the child's testimony, I am invoking an emergency protection order. Nimera will not be returning to your custody." Priscilla's face contorted with fury. "This is kidnapping," she shrieked. "I will sue this hospital. I will sue CPS. I will sue that man." She pointed at Salvatore. "He stole my niece." The child was found barefoot in a blizzard, malnourished, and covered in scars. Rachel replied calmly, "Your threats do not change facts." She turned back to Vincent and Salvatore, frustration threading through her voice. "The emergency shelter is full. Foster placement requires checks that cannot be completed tonight. I need somewhere safe for this child immediately." Salvatore stepped forward. "I will take her. Any background check, any home inspection, any supervision you require." Rachel studied him. She knew who he was. She knew the rumors, but she had also watched Nimera's face when she looked at him. There was no fear. The child who trembled at her aunt's voice, who flinched at every sudden movement, showed no panic when she looked at this man. She looked at him the way a drowning person looks at a lifeline. Vincent produced a folder. "Emergency temporary placement forms. Mr. Marchetti's residence meets all CPS requirements." Rachel took the folder. "Fine," she said, "but this is temporary placement only. Everything goes through proper channels. Follow-up visits, mandatory check-ins, continued investigation. If anything seems wrong, she will be removed immediately." Salvatore nodded once. "Understood." The elevator doors opened onto the penthouse floor with a soft chime. Salvatore stepped out first, then turned to watch Nimera follow. She moved hesitantly, her bandaged feet shuffling against the marble floor, her eyes darting in every direction as though expecting danger to emerge from the shadows. The penthouse was vast. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, the city lights glittering like scattered diamonds against the dark winter sky. The furniture was modern and expensive, all clean lines and muted colors. Everything was immaculate, polished, silent. Nimera stood frozen just inside the entrance, overwhelmed. This place had no screaming, no crashing bottles, no heavy footsteps approaching in the dark. No smell of stale alcohol and cigarette smoke. The air was clean and warm. The silence was not the dangerous kind that preceded violence, but the peaceful kind that simply existed. She did not know what to do with peace. Salvatore moved through the space quietly, adjusting things as he went. He did not turn on the bright overhead lights. Instead, he switched on the soft lamps scattered around the room, casting everything in a warm golden glow. Harsh light could feel like interrogation. Soft light felt like safety. He walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. There was not much inside suitable for a child, but there was soup from the day before. He heated it on the stove, poured it into a bowl, and set it on the kitchen table along with a small plate of bread. "Sit," he said gently. "Eat." Nimera approached the table as though it might be a trap. She climbed onto the chair slowly, her small body tense, her eyes fixed on the bowl of soup in front of her. Steam rose from the surface, curling into the air. She did not reach for the spoon. She simply stared at the food, her expression caught somewhere between hunger and disbelief. "It is for you," Salvatore said, keeping his voice low. "No one will take it away." Still she hesitated. Then, slowly, her small hand reached out and wrapped around the spoon. She lifted it to her lips and took the smallest possible sip, as though testing whether the soup was real. It was. She ate slowly, carefully, pausing between each bite. Her eyes kept flicking to Salvatore, watching for any sign that he might snatch the bowl away, might decide she had not earned this meal, might punish her for eating without permission. He did not move. He simply stood by the counter, giving her space, letting her eat at her own pace. Halfway through the meal, Nimera's hand moved with practiced stealth. Her fingers closed around a piece of bread from the plate and slipped it into the pocket of her hospital-issued gown. The motion was quick, silent, automatic. The reflex of a child who had learned to hide food because she never knew when the next meal would come. Salvatore saw it. He said nothing. He let her keep the bread. He let her have that small piece of control over her own survival. Taking it from her would only teach her that this place was like all the others. That kindness could be revoked. That safety was temporary. When Nimera finished eating, she sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. The bowl was empty. The bread on the plate was gone, except for the piece hidden in her pocket. "Where do I sleep?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Salvatore looked down the hallway. At the very end, there was a door that had not been opened in 18 years. A room preserved exactly as it had been left, frozen in time, holding the ghost of a girl who would never return. He was not ready to open that door. Not yet. "The guest room," he said quietly. "This way." He led her to a room near the living area, comfortable and neutral. He placed a soft blanket on the bed and turned on a small lamp shaped like a crescent moon. Nimera stared at the bed as though she had never seen one meant for her. And at the end of the hallway, the locked door waited in silence. The following evening, a knock echoed through the penthouse. Salvatore opened the door to find his younger brother standing in the hallway, a pizza box balanced in one hand and a paper bag in the other. Dominic Marchetti was 3 years younger, several degrees warmer, and everything Salvatore was not. Where Salvatore was silence and shadow, Dominic was noise and light. Where Salvatore commanded fear, Dominic inspired loyalty through laughter. "I heard you had a guest," Dominic said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Figured she might be hungry for something other than whatever sad bachelor food you have in that refrigerator." Salvatore closed the door behind him. "How did you hear?" Vincent called. Gave me the short version. Dominic's usual grin faded slightly. "Is she okay?" "No," Salvatore said quietly. "But she will be." Dominic nodded once, accepting this. Then his smile returned, softer now, and he walked toward the living room where Nimera sat, curled on the couch, wrapped in the blanket Salvatore had given her the night before. She tensed immediately at the sight of a stranger. Dominic noticed. He stopped several feet away from the couch and lowered himself to sit on the floor, making himself smaller, less threatening. He set the pizza box down beside him and leaned back on his hands, casual and relaxed. "Hey there," he said gently. "My name is Dominic. I am Salvatore's brother. The better-looking one, obviously." Nimera did not respond. Her eyes darted to Salvatore, seeking guidance, seeking permission. Dominic followed her gaze and understood instantly. This child asked for approval before she breathed. She had been taught that existing without permission was punishable. "I brought pizza," he continued, keeping his voice light. "Do you like pizza?" Nimera looked at Salvatore again. Her eyes asked the question her voice could not. "Am I allowed?" Salvatore nodded. "You can eat," he said softly. "You do not need to do anything first. Just eat." Dominic opened the box, releasing the warm aroma of cheese and tomato into the air. He placed a slice on a paper plate and slid it across the floor toward Nymera, still keeping his distance. She reached for it hesitantly, as though expecting it to be snatched away. When it was not, she took a small bite, then another. Dominic settled back into his relaxed position and began to talk. Not questions, not demands, just stories. "Did you know," he said casually, "that when Salvatore was 12 years old, I accidentally dumped an entire pot of tomato sauce on his head?" Nymera paused mid-bite. "It is true," Dominic continued, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Our mother was making Sunday dinner. I was supposed to be helping, but I was really just causing trouble. Salvatore walked into the kitchen at exactly the wrong moment, and whoosh, sauce everywhere. In his hair, on his face, dripping down his fancy shirt. He shook his head, laughing at the memory. He looked like a very angry tomato. Mother did not know whether to scold me or take a photograph. She did both." Nymera did not laugh, but something shifted in her face. The tight lines around her eyes softened, her shoulders, perpetually hunched toward her ears, lowered by a fraction of an inch, and in her gaze, dull and hollow since the moment Salvatore had found her, there appeared the smallest flicker of light. It was not joy. Not yet. But it was the shadow of curiosity, the faintest hint that somewhere inside this broken child, there was still a spark that had not been extinguished. Salvatore saw it. Dominic saw it too. Neither mentioned it. They simply continued the evening, letting Nymera exist in a space without demands, without fear, without the expectation of pain. Then Salvatore's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Unknown number. A text message. He opened it. The words glowed cold and sharp against the backlight. "You think you are a hero? Wait until the world finds out who you really are. Marchetti." Priscilla Dunn was not a woman who accepted defeat. She had spent years perfecting her masks, learning which lies worked on which people, understanding how to twist the system to her advantage. She had fooled social workers, charmed neighbors, and manipulated everyone who might have seen through her carefully constructed facade. She would not let one man in an expensive suit destroy everything. Within 48 hours of losing custody of Nymera, Priscilla began her counterattack. She did not know who Salvatore Marchetti truly was, but she knew how to dig. She made phone calls, she asked questions, she fed information to people who owed her favors, and then the article appeared. It was published in a local tabloid, the kind of paper that traded in scandal and speculation. The headline screamed across the page in bold letters: "Mysterious businessman takes child home in middle of night, savior or predator?" The article said nothing definitive. It made no direct accusations. But it planted seeds of doubt with surgical precision. An unnamed source described Salvatore as a wealthy recluse with no known family connections. Another suggested that his sudden interest in a vulnerable child raised troubling questions. The piece ended with a quote from a concerned citizen who wondered aloud why any single man would take such an interest in a little girl he had never met before. Priscilla had not written the article, but her fingerprints were all over it. Marcus Webb, her boyfriend, had connections. Not powerful ones, but useful ones. A cousin who worked in the police department, a friend who processed paperwork at CPS. People who could whisper in the right ears, who could slow down investigations or speed up the wrong ones. The rumors spread like infection. Within the CPS office, caseworkers began to murmur about the Marchetti case. Was the placement really appropriate? Had Rachel Smith followed proper protocol? Should there be additional scrutiny? The police, too, began to take interest. Not officially, not yet, but detectives started asking questions about the man who had appeared from nowhere to rescue a child in a blizzard. They pulled records. They made inquiries. Vincent Corsetti worked around the clock to counter each attack. He filed motions to protect Salvatore's privacy. He threatened defamation lawsuits against the tabloid. He called in favors from judges and officials who owed the Marchetti family debts that could never be spoken aloud. But Salvatore understood the truth of his situation. In the world of shadows, he was untouchable. He commanded an empire built on fear and respect. His enemies knew better than to challenge him directly. But this was not the world of shadows. This was the world of light, where courts followed rules and public opinion mattered. In this world, a man with his reputation could not simply be a hero. The stain of what he was would always color how people saw him. He could win in the darkness. But the court of public perception was a different battlefield entirely. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. The name displayed made his jaw tighten. "Mother," he answered. Elena Marchetti's voice came through the line, cold and sharp as a blade forged in winter. "I have seen the news," she said. "I have heard the whispers. You are drawing attention to this family. Dangerous attention." Salvatore said nothing. "You are putting everything at risk," Elena continued. "Everything your father built. Everything we have protected for generations. And for what? A stranger's child?" Still he remained silent. Elena's voice dropped lower, harder. "Lucia is dead, Salvatore. She has been dead for 18 years. You cannot bring her back by saving this girl. You cannot redeem yourself by playing hero. All you can do is destroy everything around you." The line went silent for a moment. Then, softer but no less cutting, she added, "Let the child go, before it is too late." Elena Marchetti arrived at the penthouse the following afternoon. She did not knock. She had a key to every property the family owned, and she used it without hesitation. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped into the foyer with the regal bearing of a woman who had ruled an empire from the shadows for over 40 years. She was 65 years old, with silver hair swept back from her face and eyes the color of winter storm clouds. Her black coat was tailored to perfection. Her jewelry was understated but unmistakably expensive. Everything about her spoke of power carefully controlled, of strength wrapped in elegance. Salvatore met her in the hallway. "Mother." Salvatore. They stood facing each other. Two pillars of the same dynasty, bound by blood and separated by grief that had never healed. Elena wasted no time on pleasantries. "I did not come here to repeat what I said on the phone," she said, her voice measured. "I came to see for myself what madness has overtaken you." Salvatore's expression did not change. "It is not madness. Then what is it?" Elena demanded. "You are risking exposure. You are inviting scrutiny from police, from media, from enemies who would love nothing more than to find a weakness in our armor. And for what? A child you do not know? A stranger who means nothing to this family?" Salvatore remained silent for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the living room. He pushed open the door and stepped aside, allowing his mother to see what lay beyond. Nymera sat on the couch, her small body curled into the corner, her arms wrapped around a worn teddy bear that Dominic had brought the night before. She wore clothes that did not quite fit, borrowed from somewhere, too large for her thin frame. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes were fixed on nothing. She looked up when the door opened. Her gaze found Elena standing in the doorway. There was no fear in those eyes, no pleading, no hope. There was only emptiness, the hollow, distant stare of a child who had learned long ago that adults could not be trusted, that expectations led to disappointment, that the safest thing to feel was nothing at all. Elena Marchetti had seen many things in her 65 years. She had witnessed violence and betrayal. She had buried a husband and a daughter. She had hardened herself against the cruelties of the world until she believed nothing could touch her anymore. But those eyes, those empty, ancient eyes in a 6-year-old face, she knew those eyes. She had seen them once before, 18 years ago, in the face of another little girl, Lucia, in the days before she was taken. Lucia, who had somehow sensed the danger approaching, who had grown quieter and more withdrawn in the weeks before everything shattered. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She stared at Nymera, and Nymera stared back, and in the silence between them, something cracked inside the matriarch's iron heart. Without a word, Elena turned and walked out of the penthouse. She did not say goodbye to Salvatore. She did not explain. She simply left, her heels clicking against the marble floor, the elevator doors closing behind her like a verdict. Salvatore watched her go, his face unreadable. That evening, as the sun set over Chicago and the city lights began to flicker to life, there was a knock at the penthouse door, a delivery. Salvatore signed for the package and carried it inside. It was large but not heavy. He set it on the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were children's clothes, soft sweaters in gentle colors, warm leggings, a pair of winter boots lined with fleece, sized for small feet, and at the bottom, wrapped separately, a doll with brown hair and painted blue eyes, wearing a tiny dress of pale pink. There was no card, no note, no signature, but Salvatore knew exactly who had sent it. The third night shattered at 2 a.m. Salvatore was not asleep. He rarely slept more than a few hours at a time, a habit forged through decades of living in a world where closing your eyes could mean never opening them again. He sat in the darkened living room, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him, his mind turning over the complications of the day. Then the scream tore through the silence. It was not a loud scream. It was small, strangled, the sound of a throat too accustomed to swallowing terror to release it fully. But in the quiet of the penthouse, it might as well have been a gunshot. Salvatore was on his feet instantly. He moved down the hallway with quick, silent steps, arriving at the guest room door in seconds. He pushed it open and stopped. Nymera was not in the bed. She was in the corner of the room, pressed against the wall where two surfaces met. Her small body folded into the smallest possible shape. Her knees were drawn to her chest. Her arms were wrapped over her head, shielding herself from blows that existed only in her memory. "No," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Please, Uncle Marcus. I will be good. I will be quiet. Please do not." Her words dissolved into sobs, muffled against her knees. Salvatore's first instinct was to rush forward, to gather her in his arms, to promise her that no one would ever hurt her again. But he had learned something in the days since he had found her in that frozen alley. This child did not trust touch. Sudden movements meant violence. Arms reaching toward her meant pain. If he grabbed her now, she would only see another monster. So instead, he lowered himself to the floor. He sat down several feet away from her, his back against the opposite wall, his hands resting visibly on his knees. He made himself small. He made himself still. He made himself safe. "Nymera," he said softly, his voice low and steady, the same tone he might use to calm a frightened animal. "You are safe. No one is going to touch you. No one is going to hurt you." She did not respond. Her body continued to shake, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You are in the penthouse," Salvatore continued, keeping his voice even. "In Chicago, with me. Marcus is not here. He cannot reach you. He will never reach you again." Slowly, slowly, Nymera's arms began to lower. Her eyes appeared above her knees, wide and glassy, reflecting the faint light from the hallway. She stared at Salvatore across the darkness, her chest heaving, her small fingers clutching the fabric of her pajamas. Minutes passed. Neither of them moved. Gradually, her breathing began to slow. The trembling in her shoulders eased by small degrees. The wild terror in her eyes faded to something more like exhaustion. She did not come closer to him. She was not ready for that. But she did not look away either. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" she asked, her voice raw and hoarse. Salvatore held her gaze. "I will be here," he said quietly. "Tonight, tomorrow, and all the days after that." Nymera stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie, for the catch, for the hidden cruelty that had always followed promises before. She did not find it. Slowly, she uncurled her body and crawled back to the bed. She climbed under the covers and pulled them up to her chin, her eyes still fixed on the doorway where Salvatore remained. He did not leave. He shifted his position so that his back rested against the wall outside her room, visible through the open door. He sat there in the darkness, a silent guardian, a promise made flesh, and when the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows, he was still there. The courthouse stood gray and imposing against the winter sky, its stone columns rising like sentinels guarding the scales of justice. Inside, the hearing room smelled of old wood and stale coffee, the scent of countless battles fought between these walls. Salvatore sat at the front table beside Vincent Corsetti, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He wore a dark suit, conservative and understated, nothing that would draw attention or invite judgment. Across the aisle, Priscilla Dunn had transformed herself once again. Gone was the shrieking woman from the hospital corridor. In her place sat a portrait of wounded motherhood. She wore a simple dress in muted blue, her hair pulled back neatly, her makeup minimal except for the carefully maintained redness around her eyes. She clutched a tissue in her trembling hands, dabbing at tears that appeared on cue whenever the judge glanced in her direction. Her lawyer, a slick man with sharp eyes and an expensive watch, rose to make his opening statement. "Your Honor, my client is a devoted guardian who has cared for her niece since infancy. She has sacrificed everything for this child, and now she faces the cruelest accusation any caretaker can endure, all because a wealthy stranger decided to insert himself into a family matter he does not understand." He turned to gesture at Salvatore. "Mr. Marchetti has no children of his own. He has no experience in childcare. His background raises serious questions about his suitability as a guardian. What were his true motives for taking this child from her home in the middle of the night? Why has he fought so aggressively to keep her from her legal family?" The insinuations hung in the air like poison. Vincent rose smoothly, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Your Honor, I would like to present the facts rather than speculation." He opened his briefcase and began to build his case like a master architect constructing a fortress. First came the medical records. Dr. Okonkwo's detailed documentation of Nymera's injuries, complete with photographs. The burn scar shaped like an iron, the belt marks across her back, the signs of chronic malnutrition. Then came the CPS report, Rachel Smith's assessment of the home environment. The history of complaints from neighbors who had heard screaming through the walls. The pattern of missed school days and unexplained absences. Then came the financial records, Priscilla's gambling debts, her alcohol purchases, the government assistance checks that should have fed and clothed Nymera, but instead disappeared into slots and bottles. Then came the witness statements, neighbors who had seen the child standing outside in winter without a coat, a convenience store clerk who had watched her buy groceries alone at 10 o'clock at night, night after night. Priscilla's composure began to crack. Her lawyer objected repeatedly, but the evidence kept coming, wave after wave. Finally, Vincent requested permission to play a video recording. The screen flickered to life. Nymera appeared, small and fragile, seated in the child-friendly interview room at CPS. Rachel Smith's voice came from off-camera, gentle and patient. "Can you tell me about living with your aunt, Nymera?" The courtroom fell silent. On the screen, Nymera sat motionless for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice flat and distant, as though reciting facts about someone else's life. "Aunt Priscilla wants me to disappear. She says I am a burden. She says she wishes I had never been born." The courtroom held its breath. Judge Margaret Chen sat behind the bench, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her weathered hands folded over the stack of documents before her. She had presided over family court for 22 years. She had seen the worst of humanity parade through these doors, draped in excuses and crocodile tears. She had learned to read the truth beneath the performances. Today, the truth had been impossible to ignore. "I have reviewed all evidence presented," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "The medical documentation, the CPS reports, the witness testimonies, and the recorded statement of the child herself." She removed her glasses and looked directly at Priscilla Dunn. "Miss Dunn, the evidence against you is overwhelming and irrefutable. The injuries sustained by Nymera were not accidents. They were not self-inflicted. They were the result of systematic abuse inflicted by you and your partner over an extended period." Priscilla's composure flickered. Her hands tightened around the tissue she had been using as a prop. "It is the judgment of this court," Judge Chen continued, "that Priscilla Dunn is permanently stripped of all guardianship rights. A restraining order will be issued immediately, prohibiting any contact with the child, direct or indirect, for the foreseeable future." She paused, allowing the weight of the words to settle. "Furthermore, based on evidence discovered during the investigation of the residents, Marcus Webb has been arrested and charged with aggravated child abuse." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The police had searched the apartment 3 days earlier. They had found the belt, stained with blood that matched Nymera's DNA. They had found the closet where she had been locked away, its interior walls scarred with scratches from small fingernails clawing desperately at the wood. The evidence was damning beyond any defense. Priscilla sat frozen for one long moment. Then the mask shattered completely. She shot to her feet, her face contorting with rage, all pretense of the grieving guardian evaporating in an instant. "She is a burden," Priscilla screamed, her voice cracking with fury. "I only took her in for the government checks. She owes me. Everything I did, she deserved. That ungrateful little. Remove her," Judge Chen ordered calmly. 2 bailiffs moved forward, gripping Priscilla by the arms. She thrashed against them, still screaming, her words dissolving into incoherent rage as they dragged her toward the exit. "You will regret this. All of you. She is nothing. Nothing." The doors closed behind her, cutting off the sound. Silence returned to the courtroom. Salvatore did not watch her go. He had no interest in her collapse, no satisfaction in her defeat. She was already irrelevant. He turned to where Nymera sat beside a court-appointed advocate, her small body rigid, her eyes wide with the shock of everything that had just unfolded. He walked to her slowly and knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "She cannot touch you anymore," he said quietly. "Never again. Do you understand?" Nymera stared at him. For weeks, she had held herself together with the desperate discipline of a child who had learned that tears brought punishment. She had buried her pain beneath silence and stillness, protecting herself the only way she knew how. But now, in this moment, something inside her broke free. Tears spilled down her hollow cheeks, silent and unstoppable. Not the tears of fear, not the tears of pain, the tears of release. And then, for the first time since Salvatore had found her trembling in that frozen alley, Nymera reached out. Her small hand slipped into his, her fingers curling around his palm. She held on tightly, desperately, not because she was afraid, because she trusted him. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet. Nymera sat in the passenger seat, her small hand still resting near Salvatore's on the center console. She did not speak. She did not need to. Something had shifted between them in that courtroom, a bridge built from trust and sealed with tears. Words would come later. For now, the silence was enough. The elevator carried them up through the building, and when the doors opened onto the penthouse floor, Nymera stepped out differently than she had before. Her shoulders were not hunched, her eyes were not darting. She walked beside Salvatore like someone who was beginning to believe she might belong here, like someone coming home. Salvatore led her inside, but he did not stop in the living room. He did not guide her to the guest room where she had slept for the past weeks. Instead, he walked down the hallway, past the familiar doors, until he reached the one at the very end, the locked door. He had not opened it in 18 years. Not once. Not to clean. Not to retrieve anything. Not even to stand in the doorway and remember. The room had become a tomb, sealed away, preserved in the amber of his grief. His hand reached for the doorknob, and he felt it tremble. Salvatore Marchetti, who had faced down enemies without flinching, who had ordered men to their deaths without a quiver in his voice, could not stop his hand from shaking as he touched this simple piece of brass. He turned the knob. The door swung open. Dust motes swirled in the light that spilled through the window, dancing in the air like ghosts. The room was small, painted in a soft pink that had faded over the years. A child's bed stood against one wall, its covers still rumpled from the last time anyone had slept there. A teddy bear sat propped against the pillow, its button eyes staring at nothing. On the walls, drawings hung in crooked frames, a house with a smiling sun, a family holding hands, a rainbow arching over green hills, the artwork of a child who had believed the world was beautiful. Lucia's artwork, Lucia's room, Lucia's ghost, waiting patiently for a brother who had finally found the courage to return. Salvatore stood in the doorway, unable to move. The memories crashed over him like waves, threatening to pull him under. Her laugh, her voice, the way she had called his name every morning, demanding he walk her to school. A small hand slipped into his. He looked down. Nymera stood beside him, her thin fingers wrapped around his palm. She did not ask questions. She did not demand explanations. She simply held his hand, offering comfort without words, giving back the same silent support he had given her through all those dark nights. Salvatore's throat tightened. He looked at the room. He looked at Nymera. He thought of Lucia, gone forever, and of this child, still here, still breathing, still waiting for someone to tell her she mattered. He could not replace his sister. No one could. The hole she had left in his heart would never fully heal. But he could give Nymera what Lucia no longer needed. A room. A home. A place to belong. "Would you like this room?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion he could not hide. "We will repaint it, however you want." Nymera looked up at him, and for the first time since he had found her freezing in that alley, he saw something bright flicker in her eyes. "Hope, can I draw anything?" she asked softly. 18 months later, the snow had long since melted from the streets of Chicago. Spring sunlight poured through the windows of the penthouse, painting golden rectangles across the marble floors. The air smelled of coffee and fresh flowers, of warmth and new beginnings. The room at the end of the hallway was no longer a shrine to grief. The faded pink walls had been replaced with soft pastel blue, the color Nymera had chosen herself. The old furniture was gone, replaced with pieces picked out during weekend shopping trips filled with laughter and debate. But the most remarkable change was on the walls themselves. Nymera had painted them. A large crescent moon glowed above the bed, rendered in silver and white, an exact replica of the nightlight Salvatore had bought her on that first terrifying night. Beside it, a small house stood beneath a yellow sun, with 4 figures holding hands in front of it. A tall man with dark hair, a slightly shorter man with a wide smile, an elegant woman with silver hair, and a little girl in a blue dress, standing in the center, connected to all of them, the Marchetti family, her family. The adoption had been finalized 3 months ago. There had been no grand celebration, no elaborate party, just the 4 of them gathered in the penthouse living room, a small cake on the table, and the quiet signing of documents that made official what their hearts had already known. Nymera had looked at the papers, then looked at Salvatore, and she had spoken 2 words she had never been allowed to say before. "Thank you, Dad." Salvatore Marchetti, the silent king, the man who had commanded an empire without ever showing weakness, had turned his face away, but not before Dominic caught the glisten in his eyes. Not before Elena reached over and squeezed her son's hand, her own composure finally cracking after 18 years of frozen grief. That night, They had eaten cake and told stories. Dominic had made Nymera laugh until milk came out of her nose. Elena had brushed the girl's hair and hummed a lullaby she had not sung since Lucia was alive. And Salvatore had sat quietly, watching his family rebuild itself around this child, who had come to them broken and was slowly becoming whole. Now, on this spring morning, Nymera burst out of her room with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Dad, school!" She ran down the hallway, her footsteps light and eager, so different from the silent shuffle of the girl who had once been afraid to exist. Her cheeks had filled out, her eyes sparkled with life. She moved through the world like someone who finally believed she had the right to take up space in it. Salvatore met her at the door, already dressed, car keys in hand. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They walked to school together, as they did every morning. Nymera's hand found his automatically, her small fingers wrapping around his palm with easy trust. She chattered the entire way, telling him about her new friend Sophie, about the math test she was nervous for, about the painting she was making in art class as a gift for Grandma Elena. Salvatore listened to every word. At the school gates, children streamed past them, laughing and shouting, alive with the energy of youth. Nymera paused before joining them, turning to look up at her father. "You will pick me up this afternoon, right?" Salvatore knelt down to her level, just as he had done in that frozen alley so many months ago. But everything was different now. Her feet were warm in sturdy boots. Her body was healthy and strong. Her eyes held no fear. "Every day," he said. Nymera smiled, bright and real and full of joy. She threw her arms around his neck in a quick hug, then turned and ran toward the school entrance, waving over her shoulder before disappearing through the doors. Salvatore stood and watched her go, and in the warm spring sunlight of Chicago, no one saw the little girl who had once stood barefoot in the snow, her face pressed against a freezing wall, trembling while she waited for permission to exist. They saw a child running toward the light, confident and free, with a father who had chosen to stay. This story was created to entertain and to inspire hope, compassion, and the quiet strength that can restore faith in humanity. It reminds us that every child deserves safety, love, and the chance to heal. It teaches us that heroes do not always wear capes. Sometimes they simply choose to stop when others would drive past, to stay when others would leave, to fight when others would surrender. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share it with someone who might need to hear that kindness still exists in this world. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our daily stories filled with emotion and meaning. We would love to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when a stranger's kindness changed everything? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories, your reflections, your words from deep within your heart mean the world to us. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in every moment of your life. May you always find warmth and love wherever your journey takes you.